The information provided on this podcast is intended to be educational and informational only and is not considered to be formal legal advice. The listener should not take or refrain from taking action based on its content. Any listener in need of legal opinion upon which to rely in decision-making should consider formally engaging an attorney to review relevant facts in detail and examine the pertinent law as it applies to those facts.
Welcome to Real Estate Milestones, where we explore fascinating topics in commercial real estate with knowledgeable industry experts. I'm your host, Ben Malik, and I'm a young real estate professional who is passionate about adding value to people's lives through the incredible power of real estate. My goal is to help you discover what the heck is going on in the industry and how you can get involved. This is Real Estate Milestones, where your future in real estate lies just around the corner.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Real Estate Milestones. Today we have Jim Cinelli on the show, who's an environmental engineer by trade. He's the principal of Liberty Environmental Incorporated with offices in Philadelphia and New York. He has 30 years of experience doing all cool things in environmental consulting, like site assessments and remediation, wastewater treatment, storage tank management, spill prevention. And the reason I mention all that is because I don't know very much about it, and that's why he's on the show. So we're going to learn what all that means and a bunch of other fun stuff that goes along with being an environmental engineer. But first, Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ben. I'm glad to be here.
I'm excited to learn a lot, but first I want to hear a little bit about what might be your first milestone in real estate.
My first personal milestone in real estate would have to be when I bought my first house. Yeah, I bought. I think I was 29 years old. I bought a little townhouse, and it was a learning experience, like it is for everybody. But sold that one and bought a couple other houses since then. So that would have to be my first milestone in real estate. I did also 5 years ago invest in an office building where our headquarters are in Reading, Pennsylvania. So that's been a real adventure. So those are a couple of real estate milestones in my personal life.
Cool. Well, I'm sure you've got a lot in your career as well, given the line of work. But to start, you're an environmental engineer. What does that mean?
What is an environment? Well, first of all, our company is an environmental consulting company. So we have really people from different walks of life, but all working somehow related to the environment. So we have geologists, we have biologists, environmental scientists, and environmental engineers. And a lot of what we do is related to real estate, of course. So almost anytime somebody's buying a commercial property, they'll do an environmental assessment. And that would be an environmental scientist going out to look at the property and taking a look at its history. What's there now? What was there 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago? And we're identifying any potential environmental concerns, because when somebody buys a property, they buy any kind of liability that comes with it, including environmental liabilities. So to a certain extent, there's possible, and I'm not a lawyer, of course, but to a certain extent, they could always go after previous owners that might have caused contamination, but they'd much rather know that before they purchase a property. So we're looking for, underground tanks holding, gasoline or diesel fuel that might have leaked, industrial processes that might have been on the site at one time. Dry cleaners are famous for contaminating soil and groundwater with chlorinated solvents. So environmental scientists conduct these investigations, and if there's a concern that we identify, then we go in and do the actual testing. Our geologists get out there with drilling rigs and drilling rig operators. They drill holes, they collect soil samples, they put in wells and collect water samples. The engineer comes in when there is contamination and it's decided that the contamination is at high enough levels that some kind of remediation needs to be done. And I'm speaking specifically about remediation engineers, environmental engineers that deal with soil and groundwater remediation, which is what I am. So we evaluate the extent of the contamination that has been identified by our geologists and scientists, and we design a system that will remediate soil or groundwater or both, so that we meet action levels that are established, typically by state governments, but sometimes by the federal government in the case of like a Superfund site, or even sometimes local governments. Other environmental engineers specialize in other different types of pollution, air quality for one. Every factory emits some kind of pollutant. Cars emit pollutants and humans emit pollutants too. You can't breathe without emitting carbon dioxide, and that's a greenhouse gas. But manufacturing plants could emit large levels of pollutants, and so those air emissions are subject to a lot of regulations, and sometimes engineers have to come in and design systems to reduce the amount of air pollution, or waste or pollution in their wastewater or in their stormwater. But an engineer is designing systems to reduce the release of pollution to our environment.
Great. Well, that's a thorough explanation, and definitely illuminates a lot about the process of how the company works and how what you guys do. But before we get into more of the meat and bones of it, how did you get into this line of work?
Geez, yeah, I usually tell people a story that goes back to when I was a kid. We had a sandbox in the back of in our backyard, and I just loved bridges and making little streams in the sand and sending water down. Something always fascinated me about the flow of water. So I went to got my bachelor's from Lehigh University in civil engineering. And I was at Lehigh from 1986 to 1990, which was right around the time where the environmental industry was exploding, because you had very new regulations in 1984 and 1986, and a lot of growth, especially in that remediation engineering sector. So when I graduated, I did practice for a couple of years doing traditional civil engineering, doing stormwater management. But I really had a passion for the environmental side, and slowly within that firm, my career, my work assignments and career progressed towards the environmental side of things. So I was out there working for a very small firm, so I had the opportunity to kind of learn what the geologists do. I was out in the field collecting soil samples and putting in wells and doing sampling, and that helped me, I think, to be a better remediation engineer, because I understood a little better the data collection that goes on before the engineering design starts.
Yeah, well, that's super exciting, and it's cool to get that variety of experience, and definitely it sounds like it's worked out for you. But so let's apply what we've learned so far to real estate. So when does a developer or an owner or a potential acquirer need to engage you? How's that process start? And then, how does that process continue? Because I know there might be multiple phases to environmental consulting and,
Yeah, sure.
assessment. So,
Well, yeah, probably 90% of the time somebody decides they want to buy a commercial property, whether it's retail or office or warehouse, and they go to a bank and they say, I need to borrow $1 million. I want to buy this property. Bank will say, okay, there's three things you need. You need a title report. We need an appraisal to confirm the value of the property, and we need an environmental assessment done. We call them phase one environmental site assessments. So a lot of times that's how we get involved first. And that's kind of how I described it before, phase one assessment, and phase two, where you go out and collect the data. And sometimes the site's clean and we're done right there. But then, if it's a contaminated site, that turns into a larger project for us, and it takes, not months, but years sometimes to remediate. Other times we just get a call. We get a call from maybe a gas station that had an alarm go off that their tank's leaking. And so we immediately just go out and perform the investigation around the leaking tank. So yeah, depending on the type of site and what's happening with it, our role can vary. On redevelopment sites, and Ben, remind me, are you located in New York City?
Yeah, I was. That's where I was this summer, but I'm back in Potomac, Maryland right now.
Gotcha. So every state has its own environmental regulations, which can make it make it challenging. I've worked primarily in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and the science is the same. The contaminants are the same, and so you do all the data collection and investigation the same way, but the regulations are so different, and what the states will allow and what they require, and therefore whether remediation is needed or not. So a lot of times if it's a redevelopment site, we're there throughout the construction phase overseeing remediation, and then we might be directing the designers, the architects, and the engineers on how to incorporate environmental protection systems into a new building that's going into place. Because sometimes you're managing contaminants in place. You don't always clean up a site until it's back to its original pristine condition. That would be completely unreasonable. So it's something that we call risk-based corrective action. We remediate to the point where not that all the contamination is completely gone, but that it no longer poses a risk to human health or the environment. So we're in there, designing and overseeing installation of ventilation systems or some kind of cap to provide a barrier between people and the contamination that's managed in place. So yeah, our work starts at pre-acquisition, and sometimes if it's a development site, goes all the way to the time where they're getting their certificate of occupancy, and people are moving into the building.
Great. So let's say it's not all hunky dory and we need a environmental phase 2 or 3, if even. What does that entail? Like, what is a traditional? Maybe we can take an example. What would be an example of something that may come up, and then how do you mitigate that? And then what's the process for an owner after that happens?
Yeah, I mean, some contaminated sites, run the full gamut. All right. You could have the very slightest amount of contamination, and it might be as simple as getting out there with a backhoe and a dump truck, digging out a little bit of soil, sending it to a landfill, and taking some samples to make sure it's clean. But first you gotta, like I said, the scientist has to go out there, collect samples, and determine the extent of contamination. The other end of the spectrum, you've got former landfills that are on the federal Superfund list that might not be cleaned up for 50 or even 100 years. And with tens of millions of dollars spent on cleanup, capping the landfill or putting in some kind of barrier to prevent the migration of contaminants in groundwater. Sometimes people already have contaminated wells, residents living around a contaminated site, and you have to install systems on their drinking wells to remove pollutants. And there has to be companies out there that then maintain those systems and monitor them, and we get involved in that as well. We have technicians that go out on sites and maintain systems. So a phase 2 could be a geologist or scientist out in the field, just putting in soil borings around a tank for 4 hours or 8 hours, or it could be a process that literally lasts years on a really giant site where that might have 100, 200, 300 wells installed over time.
Well, on that note, what's the hardest problem you've had to deal with in your business? Like the hardest environmental problem you've had to solve?
Geez. One of my favorite projects to talk about was one of our industrial clients. And it actually didn't have to do with, it was an environmental engineering project, but it didn't have to do with soil or groundwater remediation, because I've done a little bit, like you mentioned, I've done a little bit of wastewater and industrial stormwater consulting. And we had a client that had a very small discharge of cooling water, but it had really high metals concentrations. And they couldn't understand why metals were getting into their cooling tower. Cooling tower is non-contact. It's just a closed loop system. It really shouldn't, so we had to, put on our Inspector Clouseau hat and get out there and try to find the source. And well, it turns out that it was, from doing a little sampling and process of elimination, as this cooling tower water kind of trickled out of the cooling tower. It went through the storm sewer, and the storm sewer had all kinds of metals in it. And the reason it had all kinds of metals is because this was a copper tube plant. And over the years, it was emitting copper out of its stacks, and it was settling on the ground, getting into the storm sewer. And the state said, okay, great, congratulations, you found the source. We don't care that it's not coming from your cooling tower. We don't care where it's coming, but it's getting into the river. You can't do that. You got to find a way to remove it. So, wastewater treatment, groundwater treatment can be very expensive. Pumps, chemicals, tanks, and a lot of labor to manage the system. So what we did, this is a project, about 20 years ago, about the middle of my career. We did something that at the time was pretty innovative, but has gained more traction today. It's more commonly seen. We designed a constructed wetland, a big basin, and to put it in the simplest form, it's a big excavated basin, but it's filled with cattails. And it, so we designed it. We oversaw the construction, and as the cattails grew, and the wastewater would go through the cattails, the peat that they grow in, as well as the cattail plants themselves, would absorb 90% of those metals. And this company no longer was violating their discharge permit. They weren't getting fines every month from the state agency. And it was a really cool design project that ended up in a nice success story for our client. And it was a system that, I love the system because it really had zero energy, zero labor to maintain, except for occasional minor cleanouts. And it didn't require any kind of chemical injection or anything like that. You're really using kind of nature and gravity to clean up one of our man-made problems.
Yeah, and makes you think when humans think that we're so powerful and we can create all these amazing things, which is true. We always turn back and realize that nature really has this beat in its power and its ability to optimize. It's has years and years of evolution and guess symbioses and different processes of maintaining habitats that I guess still more powerful than some of the things we can do.
Yeah, and it's really cool to understand those natural processes and see how we can tweak them and use them to our benefit. To clean up our past sins or to prevent future damage to the environment. That's what's interesting from a technical standpoint about my career is it's constantly changing. There are technologies that are constantly being developed or improved upon. That's why we have to stay up on newest technologies, and we have continuing education requirements that are very important for anyone in engineering. I think especially in environmental engineering, to stay abreast of what's new and what's best for us to apply to our projects.
Yeah. So what are some of the newest cutting edge technologies?
In remediating groundwater, the old school way, which is still sometimes applied today, but it is the oldest way is, you got contamination in groundwater, you put a well in, you put a pump in that well, you pump it out, and you treat it, and then you discharge your treated groundwater. These days, we more often than pump and treat, we actually are injecting chemicals into the ground. Chemicals or sometimes nutrients and microbes. So there's chemical remediation and then there's bioremediation. Bioremediation is very viable. It's a slower process, but there are natural microbes in the ground that interestingly can degrade a lot of the contaminants that we put into groundwater. But they need stimulation. So we adjust the chemistry. We might add nutrients, and with again using just giving nature a little push, a little stimulus. We can remediate that way. But a lot of times remediation has to be done more expeditiously, and so we in the last 20 years in situ methods have been developed where you drill holes in the ground and you inject at high pressure chemicals that basically oxidize or zap, if you want to use the non-technical term, the contaminants that are in the ground. That way, sites are remediated more quickly, and they can be redeveloped. And there's been tens of thousands of thanks to changes in regulations 20 years ago and the development of new technologies. A lot of old abandoned brownfield sites are now just thriving redeveloped commercial sites, and that's another cool part of the job of somebody in the environmental industry is that we take eyesores and utilizing our skills and technology that's out there, get those old properties back on the rent rolls. So
Yeah.
we enjoy working for developers that are taking on those sometimes challenging environmentally distressed properties.
Yeah, no, that's pretty exciting. Definitely, it's cool to hear that technology is coming back and making obsolete land viable, which is definitely good for utilization. It's definitely probably good also clean up the environment just simply enough. So
Mhm.
that's pretty interesting. And I guess we've kind of danced around regulations, but I'm kind of curious to hear what's the EPA, is that who is making these regulations? Is that the big bad enemy, or is that the friend? What's the relationship there, and kind of how do you work with the regulations in that sense?
Well, the saying goes, where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit. So is EPA, the savior, or are they the enemy? I mean, obviously, everyone wants a clean environment. We don't want polluted streams. We don't want polluted air. It can be frustrating, for real estate developers when they get surprised sometimes by environmental cleanup costs that they were anticipating. And we as consultants are the go-between between the regulated entities and the regulators. So we try to get our clients in compliance with environmental regulations and other requirements at applying our knowledge and the best technology at the lowest cost possible. And sometimes we have to butt heads with the regulators when we don't agree with the decisions they're making. So we act in the interest of protecting the environment, but in our clients' best interest, so that there's not unreasonable requirements put on them. And that's the role of a consultant. And not everybody who goes into the environmental field is in consulting. Some people obviously work in the environmental agencies. Some people work for industry. But all my career, I've been in consulting. But yeah, everything comes down from the EPA, and even today there are new pollutants that are arising that we're figuring out how to deal with. There's a group of pollutants called PFAS, and I'm going to butcher this, perfluoroalkyl substances, and there's like 3,000 of them, and a lot of states only have action levels or drinking water standards for maybe a half a dozen of them. So it's very new. It's scaring some people because they don't know what their potential liability is with possible PFAS contamination. They come from plastics manufacturing, particularly the manufacturer of Teflon, and we're finding them all over. And the cleanup levels are set super low. We're talking about parts per trillion cleanup levels. So it's something that the regulated community and the regulators and we consultants in the middle are learning about and grappling with these days.
Wow, that's pretty interesting, and I mean, scary to think about how far that could go. Do we even know if we're 10% in all the possible pollutants that we've never even seen before or never discovered? I wouldn't know, but it's kind of interesting to even think that there'd be new pollutants, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we love new development of new products, and a lot of times that means developing new chemicals that goes into the products, and they make our lives better. And but then we find out 10, 20, 30 years later that we've they're causing health concerns, and it's the next wave that kind of overwhelms the environmental market.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I definitely think about that somewhat being living in New Orleans at the bottom of the Mississippi. Don't even know what's going through the pipes there, but that's why I definitely filter my water. But yeah, I
Good idea
mean,
for everyone.
yeah, yeah. So after this, definitely gonna keep that in mind. So yeah, I guess do you ever suggest like mitigants, or not mitigants, but more like prevention measures for owners before, maybe even before they engage you, that maybe like someone coming to the property should think about, just like, there's a risk with most properties that we can do something about.
Yeah, I look at things a little different than other people, and just a residence. My sister and brother-in-law have a heating oil tank in their basement, and they might have thought this is the weirdest recommendation ever, but I said, put a little containment around that tank. If the tank ever goes, and it won't spill all over and get under your house's foundation and cause a nightmare. Because even though it's a residence, if there's a release of a contaminant like heating oil, it's you're liable. So I take experiences like that and try to share them. I'm very conscious now compared to how I was many years ago about what I dump in my backyard. You see people dumping their paint thinner and whatever into the sewer, and that's why you see little placards on stormwater inlets, drains to river, no dumping, because we did a lot of bad things for the environment for many years that we need to avoid doing. Like I said, we all want clean water and clean air. We can't be lazy. We have to be diligent, not just as in our professional lives in real estate, but each individual.
Right. And I guess before we go, what or before we hit the lightning round, what should we look at if we're like looking at a new property? What should be like something we definitely check for before going too far? Maybe, some
Yeah.
clear red flags that you gotta like stay away from, or you have to input in your models before you put out an offer, before you even acquire.
There's two things. First of all, any kind of underground tank. That's always number one. How do you know if an underground tank is there? Well, I mean, when you're doing it for years and years, like I have, I can almost sniff them out like a hound dog. But there are little things on the ground surface that you can look for, like a fill cap. A layperson might not know the difference between an underground tank fill cap and a gas valve or a water valve or a sewer vent, but underground tanks have a little cap where you fill the tank with oil, and then they typically have a little vent pipe sticking out of the ground. So those, when we're doing our phase one environmental site assessment walkthroughs, that's what our hound dogs are are looking for. And then looking into the history of a site. Was it a gas station? Was it a dry cleaner? Dry cleaners, unfortunately, sometimes are very small properties with not a lot of value, but they can sometimes have huge cleanup liability. So knowing if it is or ever had actual dry cleaning on it is number two in my books. So and a layperson can go out there and do research and develop experience and start to know some of those things to look out for. I know some bankers that have actually they've been doing it a while, and they'll go out and do preliminary site walks before they call the consultant and say, hey, just to let you know, I saw this and that. So yeah, those are a
Yeah.
couple things.
Yeah, super interesting. I remember when we first met, you told me about dry cleaners and I was super surprised. I was like, I always thought about dry gas stations, but dry cleaners definitely sounds like whatever chemicals they're using are not not the best.
What's really rough about dry cleaners is that the chemicals that they use, gasoline and diesel fuel float on the water. Dry cleaning chemicals or chlorinated solvents, they're deeper than water. So it generally makes investigation and cleanup more difficult and more expensive. That's just the unfortunate thing of with dry cleaners. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's pretty crazy. Well, you ready for the lightning round?
I'm terrified of the lightning round, but go ahead.
Great. Well, what's your favorite or what superpower would you choose if you could have any superpower?
I want to fly, absolutely. Yeah, and I'd fly all over the world at every chance I had.
Nice, nice. That's a good one. That's popular in real estate, especially when you want to make sure the roof's intact.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Imagine the site investigation capabilities I would have if I could fly. Wow.
yeah, right. Well, so what's your favorite book or what's the one that's helped you the most?
Oh God, I read a great book, and it came out 30 years ago when I was in college, and I never read it. It was the business students that were reading it, and I always saw them walking around with it. Finally, a couple of years ago, I read it. I went to Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, big steel town, and this was a book about. It's called Crisis in Bethlehem, and it was about really the rise and fall of the steel industry in the United States, as told by someone who was I think for about 20 years, the editor of the newspaper in Bethlehem, and he saw and heard everything. But some great, first of all, I love industrial history, and maybe that's because of all the research I've done in my environmental career, and working for industrial clients. But I just love old industrial history, and it's sad but fascinating at the same time. The story of how the steel industry rose and fell in America. There's it came down to mentality and personality, and as much as it was technology and foreign competition. So a great read, and a book I'll probably read again in a little while.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I couldn't say that this is necessarily history, but when I read Atlas Shrugged, and like learned about, obviously it's all about like the industrial expansion of the country with the railroads and
Yeah.
buildings, whatever. But now whenever I walk in New York City and I see like the Chrysler Building or the Empire State Building, I just like I have this like emotional reaction of like how amazing and beautiful it is that like wow, before steel, like there were no skyscrapers, and then with steel, they're building the same height buildings that we're still building now. I guess we're going a little bit taller now, but it's like that order of magnitude that steel allowed for the expansion of real estate and the expansion of industry like everywhere. It's just like it's kind of weird to call like this industrial machine beautiful because that's not a classic association, but it's
Right.
really kind of interesting to think about.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Great. So what motivates you to continue every day?
Geez. Um, I have. I'm the president of this company. It's a small company. We have 30 employees, and I just love every aspect of my job, and I really like um, coming to work and doing a variety of things. So I still work on projects. I still build time to projects. I'm doing technical work, mostly managing projects, but sometimes I put a pen to paper and actually do design. And when I'm doing it, this point in my career, I'm almost always teaching somebody else's same point. So I do really like being a mentor to younger scientists and engineers. And I love growing the business. And the other half of my day is spent developing business and being looking at our strategical plan and finding ways that we can grow and be successful. So yeah, I come into the office excited every day, for a few different reasons, and I love that variety.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So what advice would you give to someone who wants to follow in your footsteps?
Um, Work your butt off. You can say that about any career, I guess, but um, make sure you love it. Make sure it's something you want to do for your career, and that whether it is environmental science or geology or engineering, make sure it's something that is going to make you want to get up and go to work every day, and then keep studying. Boy, you come out of college spending a lot of money and spending 4 years, and you know only this much of what there is to know about the environmental industry. So I got my master's in environmental engineering and just continue to attend seminars and conferences and go to continuing education because it's just like I mentioned before, technology is changing. Um, be decide, and when you decide you like it, that's great. Then be committed to being the best engineer or scientist that you can.
Great. We'll definitely take that to heart. And I think that applies to more than just engineering and science. So I appreciate
Absolutely.
it. All right. So since I put you on the spot, I want to give you a chance for revenge. So feel free to ask me any question you want to know about me.
Tell me how you landed I'm sorry, you're Tulane.
Yeah.
You're Tulane. What made you choose Tulane?
Yeah, so feels like the stars all aligned kind of when I first went down to visit. Most beautiful day ever. So funniest thing, I've applied to mostly schools in the north, like Maryland might have been the second most southern school I applied to, just because yes, that's a lot of what I've known and seen and kind of grew up with. Both my parents were at northern East Coast schools, so but I've obviously heard a lot about Tulane. Had a lot of older role models and friends who went there, and when so I had in my mind that it's a great place, and when I went down, it's the most beautiful day, walking around, and everyone was smiling, everyone was outside, like having a good time, um, and it was just like something about the energy there and like the personal aspect, where like every person, like everyone, like seemed like friends, and like everyone was open to being friends, and just like there's such a warm like environment, and the community is the same way. New Orleans is such a welcoming, open community that's super cool to be immersed in for the last couple of years. And so just the city, the school, just the culture of it is all great. And then obviously well, not obviously, but I'm studying finance, management, and philosophy, and I wanted to go to a school where all the disciplines were very strong. There's like good professors everywhere. I could have this I could explore all my different interests and kind of create my own education and learn about what and follow my curiosity and definitely have that there. And it's been a great journey, and I've realized that finance and philosophy have much more in common or have much more synergy than you might think at first glance, because your models are only as good as the assumptions you make.
Yeah.
Philosophy is really how to figure out what you don't know, and definitely helps be a better mitigator of risk and investor.
That's great. Yeah, I'm very interested in how students made their decisions these days because I have one who's going into the sophomore year in college and another one who's starting to look at schools and he's going to be a senior in high school and he's asking me, for why I made my decision and what I think of this college and this campus, and it's always good to hear stories from young people like yourself and how they made their selection.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, biggest piece of advice is like the learning is like it comes from yourself. Like, there's ways to get good grades, there's ways to just, pass, get through, but like to be curious and to, take it upon yourself to learn and not just assume that since you're at college, you're just gonna get the information that's it's just a, A equals B or A leads to B, right? Just the deeper you can be driven to learn and the more that you pursue it on your own, maybe even outside of class or just, your level of engagement and the choice to do that is, that's really, I think that makes the biggest difference. And, so yeah, I encourage anyone to think about that and make sure to, if they don't know what they're curious about, well, I mean, if they don't know what they want to do, just follow the curiosity and to use process of elimination to figure out where the right path is.
I really appreciate it when we have young employees that are not just learning what's given to them, but seeking out, their own ways to learn. Well, I'd love to, have young employees with initiative, and like I said before, the desire and willingness to continue learning. It's a great thing. It's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, that's the theme of this podcast. Almost every guest has come back to that, and it's shows with all these seemingly happy and successful people who I know are that, and yeah, it's definitely a common trend. So yeah, I appreciate that. And any final remarks? Where can people find you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, the name of, again, my name's Jim Cinelli, and the name of my company is Liberty Environmental. We have 3 offices in Pennsylvania and 1 in New York. And you can find us at www.libertyenviro.com. You can get my information on the website. I think that's the easiest way to track me down. And always like, answering questions and helping people solve their problems. So don't hesitate to reach out if you run into any environmental challenges.
Awesome. Well, I encourage anyone listening to do that. Definitely don't don't let it get too late before you remediate or solve your possible environmental issues. So definitely glad to have a resource like you, Jim. So appreciate you coming on the show. Anyone who's enjoyed this podcast or learned something, please give a 5-star rating review on Apple Podcasts. It's the best way to spread the message and make me happy because I love reading those reviews. So would appreciate that. And Jim and everyone, keep making milestones. Before you go, I just wanted to say thanks again for tuning in to another awesome episode of Real Estate Milestones. If you've been enjoying the show and you'd like to offer your support, please leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's the best way to increase the show's visibility and help the message get out to a greater audience. I really appreciate your time and support, and keep making milestones.